This is the American Roundtable on Tough TV. I'm Al Spry.
And I'm Bill Strickler.
We call it the BS free zone. No nonsense here on the American Roundtable. For the next 30 minutes, you're going to talk the truth. With Daniel Simone, he wrote a book about the Lufthansa heist in 1978, about Vincent Asaro, who just got off on it. Free man. Also, Donald Trump. Why did they not call him the presumptive nominee like they did with Bush 8 years, or I should say, more than 8 years ago? They did it with Obama, but they're always giving Trump a hard time, even though he just keeps on winning. We'll talk about that as well. Will, it's going to be a jam-packed show.
Hey, I'm looking forward to the Mafia stuff. I used to spend a lot of time in New York City, going to see the Yankees play, and riding the subway. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he's got to say.
Well, I'm an old New Yorker too, and we'll have this and a lot more for you on this edition of the American Roundtable on Tough TV. Welcome back to the American Roundtable. Well, it is great to be back here with you. I was on a refreshing cruise, and now I am ready to talk about Donald Trump and how he is still kicking butt. This is the Straight Talk Zone, or as we like to call it, especially this election season, politics is unusual. So we have Donald Trump. Just took Connecticut, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Rhode Island. He swept what they're calling the Acela primary. Clinton took everything but Rhode Island, so she's pretty much in, as far as they say, like Flynn with the nomination for the Democrats. But what do you make of the problem that the Republicans are running into? They've been running on the same thing Trump's been running on for years. Why are they so against him?
He's not part of the family, I guess you can say, since today is Family Day.
Well, what kind of family are we talking about?
Well, the guys all get together, they hang out. Trump is kind of like an outsider.
Why do you say that?
Well, you have money passing back and forth with lobbyists in D.C. You got all that political stuff going on between people, and nobody owns Trump. I mean, to me, that's probably the biggest plus for him is nobody controls him. I mean, he's actually doing what he wants to do, and the voters like that.
So he's kind of scaring them.
He's scaring them because it all comes down to money. I mean, people get freaked out because they're losing their cash. And when you talk about these other politicians, that seems to me like if Trump gets in, people aren't going to be getting paid like they used to.
Now, what about the people that are rallying against him and protesting against him, saying that he's racist and anti-this and anti-that? What do you make of those guys? Or do they have a point, or what?
Well, you can look at it from their point of view. Maybe with the wall, then you're the Mexican thing, or the Muslims, that's another thing. But, maybe it's how most people feel. And that seems to be what's going on, is people may feel like we need a wall, we need a border, or let's make sure that people coming into the country, wherever they're from, that they're not going to do any stuff to blow things up or kill people.
Well, I understand that people have that point of view, but I think ultimately that's the Republican side. But do you think the Democrats are feeling that way, or do you think this is more Republican? In other words, my question is, can he do the whole country? Can he get everyone behind him and unite instead of divide?
Well, now's the time that people try to get votes. And sometimes they say whatever they got to say to get the votes. Make promises, oh yeah, I'll do this for you, I'll do that. They get elected, they don't do it, and then everybody's disappointed in politicians. But this is to kind of like gather votes to get into office.
Mm-hmm. Well, we will definitely keep an eye on this. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a bit. Up next, Daniel Simone wrote a book about the Lufthansa heist. It's going to be a really, really good interview. I'm Al Spry.
And I'm Bill Strickler.
And this is the American Roundtable on Tough TV. Welcome back to the American Roundtable. I'm Al Spry. Well, it was described and is still today the largest cash haul in U.S. history from a robbery. It was the Lufthansa job. They talked about it in the movie Goodfellas, if you remember. Well, I have Daniel Simone on the line. Daniel just wrote a book about another robbery, and he co-wrote a book with Henry Hill, of course, the main subject of Goodfellas. Great to have you on, Daniel.
My pleasure, Al.
Well, let's talk first about what was the Lufthansa heist. Let's go into kind of the details of it.
Well, the Lufthansa heist, it was a very, very bold, daring robbery where six armed men forayed into the Lufthansa cargo building at Kennedy Airport and held captive the night staff and walked out of the high-value vault with approximately $5 million in unmarked bills and about $800,000 in jewels and expensive watches. It stands to date as the largest unrecovered cash robbery in history.
And so that money was never recovered then, you're saying?
No, it was not recovered ever, and no one was arrested or prosecuted for it. And as a result of it, 13 people connected to the robbery were murdered.
Well, now flash forward many years here, and of course the movie Goodfellas comes out about, I guess, 11 or 12 years after the robbery, and is a big hit, and gets people knowing about Henry Hill, who was one of the guys that was involved. How did you get to know Henry?
I met Henry by coincidence at a fundraiser, but when the robbery took place, I lived in the vicinities of Kennedy Airport, and at the same time, coincidentally, I was into a relationship with a Lufthansa flight attendant. So I was drawn to the story, and it was so fascinating the way it was being described in the news on a daily basis. This robbery dominated the headlines for nearly a year. And I kept it in the back of my mind that someday, at some point, I would love to write a book about it. And one day, coincidentally, I met Henry Hill at a fundraiser, and I introduced myself to him. I proposed the project, and without hesitating a second, we shook hands and we struck a deal right there and then.
Well, you know, I like to say, Daniel, that there are no coincidences in life. I believe that you kind of brought Henry over to you because you really wanted to talk about this story, which, of course, is a very fascinating one.
I tend to agree with you, Al.
I want to also talk about, let's switch forward and talk about this guy, Vincent Asaro, a reputed mobster charged in connection with the Lufthansa robbery, walking out of federal court last December, a free man after a jury cleared him of racketeering and other charges. Now, the prosecution had quite a case built up over the last, I guess this would be now 30 years, 30 plus 35 years ago. Was it a big shock?
Well, it was no shock to me. I knew the man was innocent of any implications involving the Lufthansa robbery. Of course, I knew of Vincent Asaro from many years ago, and he was a reputed violent gangster. So whatever other charges he had, the prosecutors mounted on him, such as murder charges, extortion charges, I would probably tend to believe that he certainly was a culprit of all those perpetrations, but I knew he had nothing at all to do with the Lufthansa robbery. In fact, on numerous occasions, many interviewers asked me why he wasn't mentioned in my book, and my answer was very straightforward and candid. He doesn't appear in my book because he had nothing to do with the robbery, and the media simply would not believe it. In fact, at the trial, I was interviewed by several media individuals who were attending the trial, and when I would tell them that, look, what you're hearing there on the stand from this informant is not really what happened, they simply looked at me in disbelief.
Well, you knew because you had talked to Henry Hill, then I take it, right?
Well, not only Henry Hill, but I investigated the Lufthansa case extensively, exhaustively. I also had the immeasurable cooperation from the two FBI agents who were the lead investigators on the case, and most of all, I had the full cooperation of the U.S. attorney who was in charge of the case. And I interviewed many other individuals, New York City police detectives, and also some former gangsters who were indirectly involved or had knowledge of what actually went down. And Vincent Asaro's name never, ever came up in connection with Lufthansa.
Well, this, of course, makes it hard to believe. Why would the prosecution work so hard to go after him when it seemed like the word on the street and the word around was that the guy had nothing to do with it?
Well, that's a very good question, Al. In fact, I wrote a thesis about precisely this topic. The answer to your question is, why would the prosecution mount such an expensive case at the cost of the taxpayers, which, in my estimation, they must have spent close to $4 million prosecuting Vincent Asaro. But why would they do this?
They spent almost as what was taken in the Lufthansa robbery.
That's correct. Now, why would they do this is your
Yes.
question. The answer is simple: publicity. They just wanted publicity, and they knew, the prosecutors knew, that once you inject the word Lufthansa into the case, it becomes a national attraction, which in fact, that's exactly what happened.
Well, okay, so
So,
let's say they were going after publicity. What's the end result? Why did they want such publicity? They knew they were going to lose.
well, if they did win, well, of course, it would have been a career-making event, and the U.S. attorneys will then retire from the U.S. attorney's office, go into private practice, and land positions with very prestigious law firms. Of course, if upon losing, well, that's the risk that anyone can take. Now they themselves couldn't get themselves arrested if they wanted.
Well, I like to say they wouldn't even vote for him as dog catcher. That's my one.
Correct.
Talking with Daniel Simone, co-author of the Lufthansa heist that he did with Henry Hill, from, of course, Goodfellas fame. Behind the $6 million cash haul that shook the world, available at Amazon and other places. This is American Roundtable. We'll have more for you. Welcome back to the American Roundtable. It's great to be talking with Daniel Simone today. He wrote a book about the Lufthansa heist, and of course, that is the Lufthansa heist behind the $6 million cash haul that shook the world. He wrote that with Henry Hill. He's also written a book about the Pierre Hotel robbery in 1972. Welcome back, Daniel.
My pleasure.
You said you had a special offer for people that were listening to the interview today. That sounds kind of cool. Get a little piece of the action.
Yes, we are offering an autographed copy of the actual manuscript of the Lufthansa book. It's autographed by Henry Hill and myself, and this is unprecedented. A copy of the manuscript of any book has never before made available to the public, and it is now up for grabs in very, very limited quantities, and that can be purchased on my website, which is danielsimone.net.
Now, let me ask you, this is a very interesting line of books to write in, like In the Mob stuff, and you've gotten to meet people that are in the mob, and you've gotten to get to know them, maybe even become friends with some of them. What's that like? I mean, how is it to associate with these guys? What kind of guys are they like?
Well, in actuality, Al, nothing like the way they are portrayed in the media, on television, or in the movies. There's nothing glamorous about them. For the most part, they are scratching for a living on a day-to-day basis. Very, very few of them become somewhat financially comfortable or even slightly wealthy. Very, very, very few of them. For the most part, 99% of most mafia associates are basically like rats, scraping for the crumbs or garbage that's left over. And they're also constantly in fear of an impending indictment and an imminent arrest. And of course, there's always the conscious awareness of violence. Anyone can, attack them or kill them or make an attempt on their lives. So, on the overall, in general, it's not a glamorous life in any stretch of the imagination. Their families also suffer the consequences of poor finances, and of course, when they ultimately do wind up in prison, and every one of them does, almost without exception, the families are impacted very, very negatively. So there's nothing fabulous about it.
Well, then, if there's nothing fabulous about it, what draws young men into this life?
The allure of the way they are portrayed. These individuals, this element is portrayed in films, in the media. That is the allure that draws someone wishing or desiring to be just like that character in the movie The Godfather, for example, or Goodfellas. So in essence, it's a false allure that in the end one quickly discovers that it's in reality it isn't at all the way, for example, the characters in certain movies are depicted in such a glamorous fashion.
Yeah, I can understand that. Tell me how Henry Hill was as a person.
Well, Henry was a little smarter than most of them, and that is the reason why he survived. He died in peace in his own bed, rather than either dying in the gutter of some street or in a prison cell. So he was a little smarter, a little bit more aware, and he saw an opportunity to get out of the mob when he had that opportunity, and he defected, became a government informant, and of course he was then sheltered in the Federal Witness Protection Program, and he abandoned that entire lifestyle, and he was very, very fortunate he was able to do so and escape with his life.
Well, sure, you could look at it from that point of view. You could look at it that he betrayed his friends, right?
Yes, yes, he was a fun guy to be around. Always witty with a joke. Loved to tell stories of his days of glory. Loved to embellish, even at times. And he was always interested in knowing what the other person is about. He was curious, always wanting to know. And as I said, he was not a violent individual. In fact, he always told me that he would spend hours and hours on any one given day preventing his associates from killing one another.
We're talking with Daniel Simone, author of The Lufthansa Heist, behind the $6 million cash haul that shook the world. Co-wrote that with Henry Hill, and it's available on Amazon.com and your fine bookstores nearby. Will be more on the American Roundtable. Welcome back to the American Roundtable. Great to have my guest, Daniel Simone, on the phone. Daniel, where are you calling from today?
New York City.
New York City, my old hometown. He wrote a book about the Lufthansa heist, which we just talked about. Another interesting book that you wrote was about the Pierre Hotel robbery. What's that book, and what's that one about?
Well, this is a book that will probably be published on or about the spring of 2017, about a year from now. And this is about the famous robbery that took place at the Pierre Hotel, a very, very luxurious, world-renowned hotel, which is located in Manhattan, Midtown Manhattan. And in 1972, eight very, very audacious, astute individuals held the entire hotel under siege for 2.5 hours during the night. Took captive the night staff of the hotel and ransacked the guests' safe deposit boxes, ultimately walking out of there with approximately $28 million in cash and jewels.
Holy moly.
And we must bear in mind that in 1972, $28 million would be equivalent to approximately $250 million at present value.
So you would say that was was that the biggest one in history of that type?
It was the biggest one in the sense that nothing was recovered. And again, just like the Lufthansa robbery, no one was actually prosecuted for the crime, and no one ever admitted or confessed to it.
Wow, you know what, I'm sure they'll be making a movie out of that one, because I don't think they ever did they?
No, but we're certainly hopeful that it will be. Actually, it was optioned for a film by the Emmy Award-winning actress, director, Cayman Grant, and her company, a production company which is named Titan Steel Productions. So in essence, Cayman Grant optioned both the Lufthansa book and my upcoming book about the Pierre Hotel robbery.
Oh, so we will be seeing it maybe, hopefully, somewhere.
We're hopeful.
Yeah, this is great news. It's a great subject matter. You know, one thing about the mob and in New York City and that whole thing, it's a continuing storyline for about almost 100 years, and it never gets boring, does it?
No, it never gets boring. But however, I must let our listeners know that, in my opinion, the Sicilian mafia, the traditional Sicilian mafia, has been fragmentized by aggressive prosecutors over the past 25 years or so. And what remains of that organization today are just a few remnants that are nearly extinct, awaiting to basically die or dissolve into nothing. So,
well, I hope that's the case, and then the FBI could turn to more important matters like ISIS and stuff. So
precisely.
Let's see.
Precisely.
Let's hope for the best on that. Thank you very much, Daniel Simone, and thank you for being on American Roundtable, man.
Once again, my pleasure.
All right, this is American Roundtable. We'll have more for you in just a moment. Welcome back to the American Roundtable, right here on Tough TV. My name is Al Spry. I'm here with my cohort and partner in crime, Will Strickler. Will, So now you got, I've never heard of this in any election, but you have Kasich and Cruz teaming up now against Trump. They're not even going to battle each other anymore. What do you make of that? This is unheard of. I've never heard of this.
Well, I've heard of it plenty of times. This is another deal being made.
Yeah, but I've never heard of it so much out in the public.
Oh, it's out in the public. Before, it used to just be at the convention.
Right, or they would do it over at the Grove or whatever, man,
like
and they would just
had
plot
Kennedy
things.
And you had Johnson.
Yep.
And they made the deal to bring in Johnson as a VP to bring in Texas.
So what do you think? How successful are they going to be against Trump?
Well, the way I see it is people don't like that kind of razzmatazz. They're going and
it's going to turn them off.
Yeah, what happened in the Northeast with the Pennsylvania and Maryland and the other states, the people had a chance to kind of like vote for Kasich or Cruz, and they didn't do it. That's why Trump won. I think primarily people are honest, they have good hearts, and they don't like seeing somebody beat up on, and that's what's going on with the Republican Party.
Yeah, why do you think the Republican Party and all its supposed wisdom is doing so much against Trump when he's so popular? I mean, don't they understand that they're alienating their Republican base, especially with the nonsense they pulled out in Colorado where they didn't even hold the primary, they just held caucuses, and they disenfranchised a whole state of voters?
Look at it this way. What is the Republican Party going to lose if Trump is elected? Is it connections?
They have everything to gain. I mean, they would be in power.
Right.
Do you think Kasich or Cruz is going to be able to beat Hillary Clinton? Not likely.
Right. Kasich, in my opinion, would have made a good VP for Trump because he does have history in
well, and he still could, but I don't know if the Donald's going to want him after he's pulling this nonsense with Ted Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're vilifying Donald Trump, but I don't know if they have the should we say the moral compass to do so. I mean, their hands are not clean by any stretch of the imagination. Instead of Ted Cruz, who he always looks like he's just a little slimy. Kasich seems like the most presidential of the three, but he's not exactly Mr. Excitement either.
Yeah, and he doesn't have a whole lot of personality, not like you, Al. But
nor you will.
Yeah. But you take a look at what's going on, and I try to analyze what's going on with Trump. He says what he wants to say. He's not controlled by anything else, and I keep going back to that. The other guys, you don't know who's funding them. You don't know who's going to, get paid off.
All right, that does it for us. I'm Al Spry.
And I'm Bill Strickler.
And we will be back to see you real soon on the American Roundtable on Tough TV. Thanks for watching. Tell your friends.